ready?
Now done.
Ah, look at that.
Wow, Aggie. You're so great. I know Aggie is great.
Welcome back to TTC. We've been dabbling with leaf blowers as of late, testing their claims like CFM and airspeed in miles per hour against the pitot tube lie detector. And boy, do we got a doozy for you today. Sky-high volts and absolutely insane specs for these brands' flagship blowers. Let's see if that really matters, or if those specs even live in reality with the rest of us on today's episode. We purchased the two most requested blowers from the comment section in our last video, and perhaps unsurprisingly, that starts with DeWalt, considering we covered their #1 rival, Milwaukee, and their existing Gen 2 and first dual battery blower, the 2824, last time when we visited these. Sadly, the single battery M18 blower fell victim to our own failing 1-year-old HD 12.0 battery that wasn't pulling from all banks of cells. We've since rectified the numbers you see here with a new battery, though it's still bringing up the rear on our ranking nonetheless. In stark contrast to the much better, in our opinion, sort of M36 Milwaukee blower at the top here, albeit, yeah, that's a lot of dough for some air movement. Let's see if we can improve on that. In all likelihood, that M36 model is probably trying to take on this, the DeWalt FlexVolt DCBL 77 2X1, which is also sporting higher volts than your average bear at 60 volt max, which is still up on the 40 volt max of a Milwaukee in that dual battery configuration. It advertises the same 600 CFM as the red team, but a lower 125 miles per hour of airspeed instead of 145, and it's of course been around longer. This $299 kit comes with a big and spicy 9 amp hour FlexVolt battery, or more accurately 3 amp hours when plugged into a 60 volt tool like this one, but is otherwise 9 amp hour when clipped into 20 volt yellow tools. This pack totals 162 watt hours, considering these batteries go for anywhere from $190 to $250 a piece. Yikes. This blower kit though looking like a bit of a steal right off the bat when you consider that. The 3P configured 21700 cells in this pack should be pretty peppy though, and in case we need more juice total, as in runtime here, really because blowers seemingly always do, we have the largest battery DeWalt makes, the 15 amp hour, which is also FlexVolt, bringing 5 amp hours at 60 volt max total in capacity, but also topping the weight scales as well. We measured this 60 volt blower at over 6 pounds bare, but over 9 pounds with the battery attached, which is on the upper end of the category for sure, but that's pretty manageable compared to the 10 pounds 13 ounces you'll be swinging around with the 15 amp hour battery. The ramp up on this tool is a bit lazy, especially compared to the dual battery Milwaukee, which is lightning fast, and there is no turbo button, just lever throttle adjustable turn knob here, which I prefer. Let's see how close it gets to its 125 miles per hour and 600 CFM. So it's definitely putting out enough force to propel itself, but it looks like it's seeing 109, 110, peaking sometimes 111 miles per hour. Not quite the 120 we saw with the M36, but much closer than their specs would leave you to believe. To measure the CFM, we use the internal diameter of the exit tube, which is 3.48 inches here. So of its 600, it's seeing 600, 623, 630, peaking at 632 CFM. 630 is quite good. And here's the DeWalt with a chonker of a 15 amp hour battery. It's seeing 609, 618, 619. And in mile per hour, we see 105, maybe 106. Interesting that the 3 amp hours at 60 volt putting out more juice than the 5 amp hours at 60 volt. But that difference does imply that with battery voltage drop over a run, we will be seeing less performance over time with this model, as the Milwaukee doesn't really care what kind of batteries on it, always makes the same, and has a flat performance line due to that. Let's check out the runtime test, something all these brands are sheepish about advertising for a good reason, we think. Here's the DeWalt versus the dual battery Milwaukee, which has around 75% more watt hours total. So the DeWalt As it drops down in battery voltage during a run, also drops down in performance, which isn't rare. But compared to the Milwaukee, it's noticeable, shown here, and in person is as well. It makes it to 12 minutes at full blast. At first we thought this drop was from the blower wiggling out of place, but no, the pitot was picking it up, as shown in our 15 amp hour test, which saw the same. Not an affordable combo, this one, and while the larger battery made less beans when fully charged, after only a couple minutes it's outperforming the battery with 9 amp hours written on the side of it. And it certainly does last longer, a predictable 20 minutes, or the same exact 3.5 watt hours of consumption per minute. Though despite the Milwaukee having 77% more combined capacity to draw from than the yellow line here, the DeWalt, the M36 only lasts 33% longer, drinking instead 18 watt hours per minute of runtime. So that's what it takes to stay at this unbudging level of performance, a more thirsty tool. But altogether, this DeWalt, one of the more honest blowers we've tested, starting below the M36 for now. 111 miles per hour and 632 CFM is good for 222 and 211 points, and that's 89% of claimed airspeed and 105% of claimed air CFM. If they had made the outlet tube around 3.25 instead of 3.5 inches, that might have evened these figures out a bit. But you'd have to say fairly tit for tat with the pricey M36 once it's kitted out. Looking at these, it drops a bit in performance during use, so this CFM does drop below the Milwaukee's, but it trades that for additional, albeit small in the grand scheme of things, runtime for battery size. But not at no cost. The DeWalt is louder than average, and particularly louder than the M36 blower. It measures, we saw, 92 decibels, making it the loudest blower we've tested. You sort of notice it too. So let's see where that places this before we move on to bigger and badder things, if the specs are to be believed. Starting out with a smaller deficit due to weight loss, that 1 mile per hour median performance during a run hurts this model here, as does how loud it is. Decibels being logarithmic and all, I think this points difference is fair. Plus lower capacity at 162 watt hours, but that does come at a lower price point to boot, and that lower price point affords this model 61 points. Subjectively, the amount of air coming out of this thing in peak performance is very similar to the M36 we felt. It weighs less, but also has a very slow ramp up and drops off in performance the longer you use it. Ultimately, it gets a 182 from us, similar performance, but the things mentioned and noise are really what made this a bit less than a Milwaukee. That total is 973, all columns considered, putting it below the M36 dual battery and below the mid-range Ego as well, mainly due to price compared to the Ego and noise versus the Milwaukee, which are two significant things to consider on a leaf blower. But really, considering the score overall for the price paid versus where the Milwaukee is, the Milwaukee's not light years ahead. Our next blower is Ryobi's latest flagship 40 volt model, which by the numbers should be light years ahead. Now, probably because we've tested their bottom of the barrel 18 volt model, many of you mentioned wanting to see this particular Ryobi. This is the RY404-100, their Whisper model that's advertising an eye-watering 190 miles per hour and also 730 CFM. It gets its Whisper name because, well, it's quiet, or at least much quieter than other models you can buy and that we've tested here. Quiet enough, in fact, that your daughter might want to play games with it rather than the usual hands over the ears routine I see. It seemingly achieves this from lining both the intake side of the funnel and fan outlet side with wall-to-wall low-density foam. The intake side is a more rare sight from what I've seen, and if you've ever used a cordless blower, you'll notice how it's not so much the air coming out of the tool, but the air being sucked into it that's causing a ruckus. This dampens that to an effective degree. Here's how the DeWalt sounds again. And here's the Ryobi. Looks like we're seeing just 79 decibels on the upper end. That'll make for some friendly neighbors. And here's the sound of my next door neighbor's lawn care crew with their still gas leaf blower that I'm serenaded by often. And this is what the Ryobi sounds like from the same distance. Quite a difference. And all that from a reportedly 190 miles per hour blower. A Category 5 Hurricane starts at just 157 miles per hour. This $329 kit came with 2 batteries, which totals the same 288 watt hours as the M36, but of course you can only use one of them at a time, so you'll need to swap them out. Still at the price compared to the top options discussed thus far, that's not a bad value. It weighs the same as the DeWalt with the battery attached as we found, but also feels a bit more comfortable. It's more balanced, so it feels less taxing. And the blower being quiet with a nice clicky trigger with fast startup really gives you the impression of power from this tool. When it comes to the numbers though, oh boy, strap in. Here it is in high. 90 miles per hour, and here's it in turbo. 120, okay, peaking at 121. In case you don't want to do the long division at home, 121 is less than 190 miles per hour. But when we're talking about that 730 CFM, it delivers the goods. 726, 733, yeah, 733 CFM, basically spot on. So how did they get the speed so wrong then? Well, Ryobi's playing a bit at some funny business. They have these soft nozzle options with numbers on them that are apparently designating the air speed that you enjoy with each of their use. This one says 190, and that's not 190 millimeters, and you can cut them to length if preferred. But this lowest rated one here does surely imply that the blower itself without one is under 160 miles per hour, for instance. So let's take a look at the 191. 140, 146, 145, 146 miles per hour. Well, that's still not 190, but why wouldn't you just use that all the time if it gets you more airspeed? Well, of course, because air volume plummets. With the new 2.8-inch outlet, it goes from 733 measured CFM to 545, 540 CFM, which is still a lot, but I mean, come on. Realistically, we thought everyone might be playing this game when we started testing blowers, but so far it's only been this clear once with this Ryobi that they are listing specs on opposite ends of the pool in the title. Sure, the Milwaukee, if you take it apart and you just sort of held the fan out in the air, it could probably make 700 CFM. Then if you taper that tube down to a straw's diameter, you could get 200 miles per hour, but neither of those things would make it a 700 CFM, 200 miles per hour blower. It's sort of one or the other. Ryobi knows this too, as their own 18 volt blower is leading in total specs honesty points, so they know exactly what they're doing here. Basically, they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. Now, these numbers are made a bit more dramatic when we're looking at runtime. Here's both the smallest nozzle and no nozzle looking at airspeed across runtime. Keep in mind the CFM is a lot higher here than the others, but the Ryobi drops down at 4 minutes noticeably and dies by 10 minutes on the one battery, which shouldn't be surprising. It's running off half the watt hours attached than the Milwaukee. Now here's sort of what total runtime would look like for your money as you get two batteries in the kit. Not counting the time to switch them out, the Ryobi lasts 20 minutes now, but its performance is a bit all over the place. Okay, now with that said, overall it's still the best cordless blower that I've had the chance to use. Of course, we care about specs honesty because we don't want to reward being lied to, and it will get dinged in the points for that, but the mixture of how quiet this thing feels like in real life, with the type of trigger I prefer, balance, and yeah, tons of CFM, it is just better. Oddly, it feels more powerful the quieter it is. So it gets a 190 subjective score from us because even if these two were to cost the same, we'd still prefer the Ryobi kit, and that's coming from the same TTI folks who make both these tools with the same peak voltage, which I find kind of funny. The Ryobi gets rewarded here for total watt hours included, although dinged here for only getting 10 minutes with a sort of as tested setup, which we feel is fair. Otherwise, you could have like a 100 pack of D-cell batteries and a tool that took 4 at a time, and it would do well here in the points. It unsurprisingly earns the highest we've seen from performance alone here, but that miles per hour drops to 94 halfway through its runtime, which hurts it here. And yeah, this is a bit of a black eye, but also it's getting rewarded by fair margin for being the quietest blower we've tested. And that totals 1063.7, putting it atop for now, which overcoming all of these points deficits, it probably earned that. So what do you think could topple this Ryobi? We'll probably buy that next. The flagship Ego, an 800 CFM Caterpillar blower, a rake? Let us know, click subscribe to catch that, and thanks for watching.